Hi, I'm Ryan Brenizer, and I'm here to talk about my top 5 tips for improving your lighting in wedding photography. For us, basically, everything that we use on a wedding day are things that we have to carry out the door ourselves. And so our primary lighting tool is always going to be, these little speed lights here. Now, most of what we do throughout the wedding day, in almost any culture, is you are primarily there as a photojournalist. Even if you are somebody more known for portraits, you will spend more time actually just being there, taking things in through the lens. If I can get away with it at all, which basically means almost any time that I am indoors, I will use bounce lighting, which is essentially just turning that light away from your subject to a certain direction, and you're kind of playing billiards with light. There's a couple reasons that I really love this so much. First of all, I want light that can travel with me anywhere. You never know where the moment is going to be, and the thing that is really primarily most crucial to me as a wedding photographer is getting those brilliant moment photographs, those photographs that will stand the test of time and be even more important 1 year later, 10 years later, decades later. And so we want to make sure that those are lit correctly. And so if we set up a bunch of light stands everywhere, the more light that you set up, generally the smaller a space there is, that it looks perfect. We want to do exactly the opposite. We might want to go hundreds of feet that way, hundreds of feet back this way, and have the light look fundamentally the same, which is why it's really handy that this flash travels with us as we're shooting around. So I can shoot on the dance floor, but if I look to the left and there's also something really great happening, with the bride is talking to her grandmother, like I want to be able to just run over and photograph that moment without having to drag stands with me or make 100 different settings changes. So that's the main reason. It also happens to be maybe not the most interesting light in the world, but a very attractive light. It sort of just kind of lights everywhere. I like to put it a little bit off to the right like this, a little bit behind me, so that I'm not getting that front-facing light, and also so that I can very quickly change the direction of the light source, particularly when I'm using a telephoto lens, just by changing the framing of the photo. So if somebody's looking this way, I'll tend to want the light kind of filling in the face. I want it coming from the direction that they're looking. Say they're giving a speech and then they gesture over here. Now it takes me longer to keep moving my flash back and forth than it takes somebody to turn their head, but I can do this just as fast. So if somebody turns their head this way, I can quickly just turn over here, and all of a sudden the light is still coming from the broad side of the face, still kind of filling it in that way that's a lot more attractive. So the next tip is learning how to use backlight well. Backlight can be effective for portraits. It can also be effective for photojournalism if you have the flash placed carefully. And it's really about making your subject stand out against the background. We're taking a three-dimensional world and we're flattening it into a two-dimensional photograph. So anything that can make that stand back out and pop back at you, is something that I'm a fan of. But proper backlight, you're not shining directly into the camera. So you want to really, really control the way the light wraps around your subject, to create an interesting frame. A lot of times you gotta think about, backlight will also kind of function as front light. It will wrap around you if you are in a kind of indoor situation, especially when you're lighting, a wedding dress. But you want to think about, how. If you're whether you're trying to create a real isolated backlight or you're not, you want to think about how that environment will affect it. So if you're trying to create a backlight silhouette and you're in a tiny little room that all has white walls, you might be out of luck because that light might just bounce around everywhere and kind of create a general bounce flash look. So you really, really, really want to understand what's going to happen in your backlight before you set it up. So it is, again, very, very handy in freezing frame, freezing motion. One of the things we use it for a lot is also hairspray. Setting up a flash so that you can kind of freeze that droplets of hairspray, and kind of make one of the few parts of getting ready that is sort of inherently interesting look as good as possible. So related to backlight is sometimes we can actually use that principle of the light bouncing around everywhere and basically turn a flash into a light grenade. In this scene here, we put the flash, again, the light behind the subject, but instead of lighting directly back at us like a backlight, having that light come directly around them, we bounce with it. We aimed it straight up behind them. And often, in some scenes, especially if you're lighting hard enough, you can turn the whole background into something very high key. Sometimes you can just toss a flash into an elevator and you have, the inside goes from ugly elevator parts to just like this giant, bright, white glow, especially if your subjects are in relative darkness. So my next lighting tip is essentially that many things happen that are generally good when a light moves closer to your subject. And one of the things that's very important when you're dealing with small lights like this is really the only geeky thing you need to know about light, called the inverse square law. So all the inverse square law means is that as a light source moves closer to its subject, it starts becoming more and more very dramatically brighter. So if something moves, is half as far away to you, it's twice as close, it's going to be 4 times as powerful. That's what the square means. And if something is 10 times as close to you, is 10% closer, it's actually going to be 100 times as powerful. And that's why little flashes like this can overpower the sun, which is a giant nuclear ball of flame, because these can be so much closer to you. So what happens in a scene, even like this, where you have this very bright sunlight, is that the flash, even bouncing through a softbox, which again cuts about 1.5 stops of power out of it, but the flash is just off frame. It is like several inches away from the edge of the frame. You can't see it, but it's very close to the bride's face. And even though in raw power that the sun is unimaginably more powerful, that flash is so much closer that we can create that kind of balance. By moving a light closer, you will also make it softer because its apparent size is becoming larger relative to the subject. And you'll also have a lot more fall off, which is part of the same inverse square law, because one part of the body or part of the face is all of a sudden relatively farther away from the light. For our final tip, I will explain why sometimes I get really excited when the ambient light goes all the way down to very dim. It is much easier to overcome the ambient light when that ambient light is very dim, and you start getting in the range that you can use continuous lighting, like we happen to be using here for this video. Using any kind of video light, any kind of continuous lighting, which again could be very expensive light, you purchase full lighting setup, or it could be something as simple as a lamp that you move closer to your subjects and and have control of. It becomes a lot easier and a lot faster to set up lighting on your subjects. And that's because, flash is kind of tough because you flash it and it goes off in 1/50,000th of a second. You couldn't really see what just happened. You have to look down at your camera, then, kind of figure out if you need to move the light, change the light power, move your subject. And then you have to communicate all of this with your assistant. And, you have to have, some kind of radio trigger control to trigger that flash and do all of these things. Whereas video light or any kind of continuous light source is literally just light. If it looks good to your eyes, it will probably look good to your camera. You can do things like, if I wanted to figure out where the Rembrandt shadow is, the little triangle shadow, under the nose that meets the cheek, with a light I have to, keep testing. But if I have a video light, I can literally just move the light around the subject or move the subject's face until I see it and then say, there it is, and shoot. Lastly, there is no radio triggering. I love radio triggers, but they do sometimes tend to fail when you need them most. You have no line of sight issues. You could be a million miles away. As long as that light is shining on your subject, you can just shoot. So things start getting a lot faster, a lot easier, a lot better, actually when the lights come down and we can move into the territory of continuous lighting. So be sure to check out your video lights as well as your strobes. So I hope that helps. Those are some of my top 5 techniques for improving your lighting in wedding photography. This is Ryan Brenizer, New York City wedding photographer. Thank you so much for watching.